Good afternoon. It's good to see so many people here, both live and via Zoom. This is going to be a wonderful celebration of Vince's life. My name's Glenn Perica, and I'm a neighbor of Vince's. Lived on the cul-de-sac there, and for the last several years, my wife Chris and I have had the joy of hosting Vince at neighborhood gatherings. But we are newcomers to the party of Vince Murphy's life. You know him. We have known him just 5-6 years at most, but I'm just curious, how many of you have known Vince longer than, let's say, 20 years? Longer than 30? Longer than 40? You guys park your wheelchairs out in the back? I don't understand. That's great. What a legacy. What a legacy. You know, one of the things that strikes me is how much a person makes an impact on other people's lives and they never know it. And as I look at this gathering here and those that are online via Zoom, Vince has left your fingerprints on your lives. And in so many ways. And you're going to have an opportunity to share with one another the way that Vince has left his fingerprints on your life and influenced you, whether as a colleague, a mentor, a student, a friend, a bicyclist, one who drank some beer with Vince. I understand he drank some beer. I myself having shared a few beers with Vince on occasions. So this is an occasion for us to celebrate his wonderful life. And I hope that that'll be the spirit of all of the comments that you will be invited to share at this podium or to share via Zoom, and we'll see all your faces there. To those of you who are not here, and if you would like to speak at an appropriate time, we're going to ask you to unmute yourself or press the paddle button and raise a hand to speak. But we're going to take comments from those that are here first and then open up memories that others would like to share via Zoom afterwards. So just be patient. There are wonderful stories to be shared, and we'd like to hear all of them. So on behalf of Chris and his family, extended family, I welcome you to this celebration of life. We are going to open, I think, with remembrances of Vince. So if you have a memory that you would like to come to the podium and share for a few minutes, I invite you to do that. Just raise a hand. You can come on up, and if there is a line of people that are waiting to speak, maybe you could just sort of queue up right here. All right? Great.
Good afternoon. This is quite a tribute to Vince. I'm Tim Kelly, Kathy Kelly Murphy's younger brother. I guess my first recollections were when my sister came home from UMass, and she told my Lithuanian mother, Vince and I got married. And my father reacted as fathers in the 60s did. He asked for a bourbon and water. My mother, she started on a rant. How could she do this to us? This is a disgrace. He has long hair. He has a beard. And on it went. She hadn't got to really meet Vince. Well, my sister had gone off to college, and I guess she went under the pretense of getting an education, but I think she was really looking for her equal. And in Vince Murphy, she found her equal. He was a little bit older, perhaps a little bit wiser, but she would never admit to that. But if there were ever two peas in a pod, they were Kathy Kelly and Vince Murphy. Vince, he was just a wonderful guy, and I guess when you look in life, you look around and what's your legacy? And in Vince, whether it was my brother Dan, my brother Dennis, my sister Sheila, myself, he was a good guy. And I guess if we can all look at each other and say, you know, someone says, hey, he was a good guy, I guess that really means something. Obviously, with all the intelligent people here, Vince was highly intelligent, but he never, ever imposed that on anyone. He never let on how smart he was. That was Vince Murphy. He didn't have to tell you how smart he was. My father used to say, we all put our pants on the same way, one leg at a time. Don't ever look up to anyone, don't ever look down on anyone. And I think that's the way Vince lived his life. He was just a wonderful, wonderful guy, so.
I'm Rick Price. I'm one of the people complicit in taking Vince and others bicycling. All these photos you see with those jerseys, somebody in my staff designed those jerseys. But, you know, my daughter tells me we have taken tens of thousands of people bicycling. I don't think it was that many. It didn't seem like that. But I remember a few of them. And I got to tell you, I remember Vince for a couple things. For three things. One is, of all those tens of thousands of people I've fitted people on bikes, I probably gave Vince the ugliest bike in the fleet. Vince was so tall, as you know, and I gave him an orange Vicini bicycle built by Mario Vicini, raced in the Tour de Giro d'Italia in 1949 and others. And I gave him that bike thinking, God, what if he hates Halloween? What if he hates orange? It was a terrible orange color. Vince wouldn't do that. He wouldn't say that. He rode that bike, and I think he had a great time. We all had a great time that summer of 1987, 35 years ago. 2 years later, we started needing tour leaders. We were leading too many tours. Powell and I couldn't do it ourselves. So who did we pick? Young fellow sitting over here, Chris. Chris came and was the first tour leader, one of our first hired hands in 1989. I'm a geographer. I kind of know the lay of the land. We got to Pisa at the end of that tour, and several customers wanted to take a ride out to the beach, about 11 kilometers away. So I said, Chris, you're going to lead this ride because I got to change out some bicycles. Said, you go down this street all the way to the river, cross the river, and follow the river downstream to the beach. It was a few years later that a customer on that ride said to me, Rick, I thought we were really in trouble that day. When we all stopped at the river, he probably had 10 or 11 people following him. We stopped at the river, and then noticed this young fellow is looking at the river to see which way it's flowing. True story. And the third thing that I want to tell you is how much we enjoyed not just the whole family, but Kathy in particular, and how much Vince worshipped her, was entertained by her. I remember once in Sardinia, Paul and I were leading that tour, and we had an obnoxious fellow. We don't get very many obnoxious people on our tours, don't get the wrong idea. This guy was obnoxious. And we sat down to dinner one evening, and he said something, I don't know what, but Kathy said, kind of sotto voce, why is he such a horse's ass? I heard it, and Vince heard it, and in typical Vince fashion, he smiled, he didn't chuckle, he chortled, kind of lowered his head, just shook his head as if to say, that's my calf. What a great time. Vince came with us over his full bike career 27 times.
Hi. Um, when I looked up the schedule of CSU's spring break, because I was driving up from Boulder, and I realized that Vince passed away on the Sunday of spring break, and we're having our memorial service on the Friday of spring break, I thought, only Vince, you can't interfere with school, you can't interfere with classes. So I had the honor of teaching with Vince for almost 20 years alongside of him, and what I want to speak to is his legacy. See, I won't cry if I pretend he's watching me. His legacy as an engineering educator. And, you know, I look out at this crowd and I go, oh, you guys, you all know what education was that came out of the 1950s, so I'm just preaching to the choir. But to some of you who are the age of my children and my grandchildren, you may not realize what education was that came out of the 1950s. I mean, when Vince taught, he was absolutely committed to the concept that you bring in teenagers and you turn out professionals. And you only have 4 years to do that. And you gotta make sure they have mastered the fundamentals of their field in 4 years. And for a field as hard as chemical engineering, that's a big task. And for the students who had him, and there's some of you in here who had him, he was amazing. I mean, he corrected your spelling, he corrected your punctuation, he corrected your grammar, he made sure you communicated properly, and he checked your technology and your science to make sure you were doing it correctly. He was a tremendous reader, and so his understanding of language was quite excellent when compared with most engineers. And he demanded that of his students, and he demanded that of himself. You know, I think about him because I have a grandson that's in his freshman year at CU. And he does his classes online, he does his quizzes online, he does his exams online, and he might get up at 5 p.m. to start his schoolwork, and he gets high grades. Well, if you were a student of Dr. Murphy's, you went to class, and you attended recitation, he looked you right in the eye, he knew your name, he knew your town, he knew where you were from and what that meant. He knew your strengths. He knew your weaknesses. He knew how hard you worked. And even if you had a 4.0, if you hadn't worked hard enough, there was maybe a question there. And he knew if you were on schedule to graduate to his standards of what a chemical engineer should be. I was always amazed because everything was graded in a way that gave partial credit, not because he's just trying to gather up points, but because he wanted each student to learn where they knew the concepts and where they didn't know the concepts, so that that student could go back and learn what they were missing. Every bit of feedback was an opportunity for a student to learn. You know, and I was thinking, okay, how do you describe Vince? Well, he wasn't one of the warm fuzzy teachers at Hogwarts, but he wasn't a Snape. And then I think of the military sergeants who are out running 20 miles when their students are running 20 miles, but that's not even a correct metaphor, because when a student spent 4 hours writing a lab up to turn it into him, he would spend maybe a half an hour to an hour grading each lab. Well, what a student spent 4 hours on, Vince might have spent 30 hours on, or 15 hours on, or 20 hours on just grading, so that that student can have the feedback. And now, as all of you students have grown up, you may look back and realize that he was maybe sleeping 6 hours a night. I don't know. Christopher can answer for me, but I don't know when he slept. He just felt that a fully fledged student needed proper grammar, punctuation, communication, technical understanding, and most of all, that the best tool a professor had was feedback, written feedback. But I think for me personally, the most impressive part of Vince Murphy was his character. I mean, he lived in complete humility and with a total absence of ego. You know, when I can't even describe it. I imagine the Olympic Stadium with 3 molecules allowed to say I or me, and nothing else could. Everything was about his students, his passions, others, the people he was serving. And in this era of raising money, being a faculty member with a big research program, Vince, he was concentrated selflessness. No big publication list, no company in his name, no Everest climbs, no marathons won. That's unusual in Colorado. Everybody's an athlete in Colorado. No technical verbal contests. And as an engineer and as a female engineer that came up in the 1970s, I have to say, no verbal technical contests parading as conversation was like a gold nugget. No one-upmanship at all of any kind. In my 35 years of technical work, I would say this was the rarest kernel among a technology person, the rarest kernel that made Vince a real gem. Looking back, I feel so blessed to have spent nearly 20 years working with him and with a faculty that he recruited that embodied his best characteristics. And I have to say, he was truly an icon of his time. He was one of the great educators of a time when being an educator was the purpose of being a professor. And Vince might not like this metaphor because he was irreverent, and I valued that in him. But to me, he will always be like the Jesuit, walking barefoot so that his parish can have his shoes.
Hadn't planned to say anything, but no one from my group got up here before me. Jim, are you going to say anything? I knew Vince through book group. I knew him through our Friday night beer group. My wife and I had dinners with Vince. We went snowshoeing. And occasionally he and I did do a few bike rides around town, up north. I just wanted to add a couple things. One, never get into a trivia contest with Vince. His memory and his ability to come up with names of songs and movies and who played what part I noticed down here, he never forgot a birthday. I was lucky enough to be with Vince at least once a week, almost the entire last year, or at least 6 or 8 months, and we go shopping. That was my job, was to take Vince shopping, which was, I talked to Christopher about this, and you could say it was an ordeal, but you could also say it was quite fun-loving type of experience. Vince memorized every sale that he was going to find. He didn't bring the sheet. He didn't bring it. He knew where he wanted to go. He knew where he wanted to go. But I wanted to tell you about this. He never forgot a birthday. So if you ever got a birthday card from Vince, I want you to know that he studied it. We would go to the birthday card section, and he would pick up a card. I know he had trouble seeing a little bit, but it didn't take that long to read a few words. But he was figuring out if this was going to work. And he'd maybe put it back. And then we'd go over here and we'd pick up another card. Maybe that one didn't work. We might be at that card spot 10, 15 minutes or more to get maybe 1 or 2 cards. But that was always usually one of our spots. I will miss Vince, his wit, his humor. We would come home and we would always end with a beer. He always had my favorite beer handy. And we would sit there and chat about childhood or whatever. So he meant a lot to our family, and as did Kathy. Kathy and Melissa were dear friends, had a book group together. Miss Vince, we love you all. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Chris and I met about the 4th grade, been friends over the years. And so as a teenager, I spent many long hours over at Chris's house. The things I remember about that time, Vince always seemed like kind of a mythical character. You know, he didn't see him too much because he was so busy working. I mean, he was very dedicated to, you know, his students and his teaching. But I remember he always seemed very interesting because, like, well, for one thing, he drove this 1971 Pinto, the kind that would explode, you know, if you hit it in the back. It needed a bungee cord to keep one of the doors shut. But I think he had a nicer bicycle than a car at that point. And I remember being fascinated, you know, before there were any brew pubs, before there was craft beer, that you'd open his fridge and there would be these strange, dark bottles of beer that had serial numbers on them and things like that. And I remember he had very few words for these obnoxious teenage boys, you know, invading his house, but he was always seemed kind and friendly, and the few words that he had seemed very wise and profound. So I have very kind memories I carry forward to these days. And you know, seeing him just a couple of years ago and sharing a beer, I was glad to have the opportunity to know him in a different context as an adult.
For those of you
may not know me. I'll get it ready. I hired Vince. I've made some great hires, but he stands out. The department today is what it is, largely because of Vince. He was my mentor, and I enjoyed many times with him. He's going to be sorely missed. And just a great human being. I can't believe he's gone. CSU was lucky to have him. And he was a real aficionado of athletics. And he was a big supporter of women's athletics. So I attended a lot of games with him. But he always gave me good, sage advice. I appreciated it. Now, Vince had some interesting characteristics. Right. But you certainly didn't question his motivations or his intentions. He was honest to a fault, I would say. But he was loyal to all his friends. He was absolutely committed to his students. And he always had something funny to say. So I really count him as one of my mentors. And chemical engineering at CSU would not have occurred without him. And I remember when I hired him, and he came here from, I think, New Orleans and the Southern Regional Lab down there, and he had a very interesting background. And the chemical engineering department here and chemical engineering here is very different too, so he fitted in. And I really count him as one of several really good hires that I made at the time. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I can judge character, and Vince had character. So we're going to miss him. Thank you.
Standing, and I found about Vince passing only yesterday. You guys know I haven't been in touch much with my colleagues here, and Anyway, Vince hired me in 1985. I just finished my PhD at Clemson and came to Fort Collins, and he was the best department head, the best mentor you can have. And I decided to quit early and go to the mountains and play. And I'm skiing a lot and meet a lot of people. And I'm from Israel, and I'm telling them this is the promised land. So I'm very grateful for Vince bringing me here to Fort Collins, and I was in an awkward position, as my colleagues know, but he always supported me and helped and mentored me. You couldn't ask for anyone better to do it. So I'll miss him a lot.
If there are no others that want to speak that are present, then let's open it up. One more? Two more? Great.
My name is Amy, and my family and I, we grew up across the street from Christopher and Vince and Kathy, and we all moved to the same neighborhood in Wood West in 76, 77. And I'm a fourth generation Coloradan, and I had never heard people speak this way before. Their East Coast dialect, I had to really pay attention, and the more I paid attention, the more I heard Vince. And our family has amazing stories, birthday stories with Ron and Sally and my parents, and I hope you talk to Ron and Sally and my parents to hear some of those stories. But Vince left a mark on me as a kid, because I had to listen to him as an adult, and his presence I have felt my entire life. So I will particularly miss him, and I'm just grateful that you're allowing us to share these moments, because he was truly one special good guy. Thank you.
I'm Peggy, and I worked with Vince. He was department head at the time. And I remember, as Carol said, that grammar, punctuation, sentence structure, everything had to be perfect. And so he and I were discussing something in his office one day, and he looked at me, and he pulled up his hand, and I said, "What?" And he says, "Well, if you got your hand hit as many times with that ruler from that nun, you'd learn too."
I couldn't resist after Judd talked about Vince. I just wanted to say a few words. And some of you I met on that Friday afternoon club. I wasn't a beer drinker, but boy, did I watch a lot of beer getting drunk. And so I got to know Vincent from 1995 because my mentor is Barb McCorder, David's spouse, and David and all these engineers here. Why am I having, Friday afternoon with engineers? I'm an education major and things like that. Well, now I'm the executive director of the Colorado Department of Higher Ed and the Colorado Commission on Higher Ed. And so whenever I come to a campus, I have to let the presidents know that I'm on their campus. So I texted with President McConnell last night, and because I wanted her to know that we were celebrating Vince today. And although she's new to Fort Collins and new to the campus, I wanted her to know the substance of the former professors that were here. And she would have been here, but her mom just recently passed, and so she's actually back east with her dad. But she sends her regards and her condolences, and I wanted to express that along with my own. Vince was a great guy. I'm from the Bronx. He's from Brooklyn. So whenever on those Fridays we would struggle about which borough was better, and of course the Bronx was always. It's the only borough with an article, the Bronx. So, and we talked sports. I played basketball in college, and so we had a lot in common, being from the East and loving sports. But most of all, I think as has been said, he's just a great, great guy. And every time I saw him, he welcomed me back with welcome arms, and just a great guy. And it's going to be sorely missed. So thanks to the family.
Are there any more? Yes, come forward.
Earlier, my name's Bear. Earlier, Paul mentioned a book club that we have. And we get together, actually the first 10 or 15 years, we got together once a month and read a book. And then 10 or 15 years ago, somebody said, can't we get together and not have to read a book? And so we've been meeting for over 30 years. And you get to know a guy pretty well, you know, especially if you're discussing the same book. And what struck me in thinking about his legacy for our book club is he was a very generous reader. I mean, we would read a book and we would all agree, this is a stinker, all right? And then we would hold it against whoever recommended it, of course, you know. But Vince would then say, oh, I don't know, you know, and he'd find something good about it. And it seems like he found something good about almost all books. There were some books that he just, you know. But that's what I wanted to share, was that he was a very generous reader and a wonderful host. He had plenty of beer, as you might guess. It was just, what a treat to know a guy for that long. And just, yeah, I concur with everybody else. What a man. Yeah.
I think we're going to open this up and let those who have been zooming in on us raise their hands and so they can ask a few questions. One thing I will do just before we allow that is, you know, I thought many times about someone as dear of a man as Vince, and I wish that all of us wish that we could have brought him back. But the nice thing is that we can carry him forward. And all of you are offering a testimony of how you are carrying him forward. And he would want us to do that. He'd correct our spelling, but he would want us to do that. So who do we have online here?
This is Tony Allegretza. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, hi. Listen, in 1968, when I arrived at UMass Amherst to start graduate school, listening to you people, I am impressed that we all have the same feelings towards Vince. You got the real Vince, and that's because he was a real person. I told Christopher that this was a tough one to get through, and I left my complete thoughts on the funeral home website, and I agree with you about everything. And I am glad that he had a great bunch of friends who could see him off. Thank you for letting me join you.
Put on the camera.
Yeah, hi, my name is Don Murphy. I'm Vince's brother. I know the screen says Annie Murphy, probably because I'm on my daughter's computer. I've heard all these great tributes from my brother, and they're very heartwarming. As I think about him and all the beautiful tributes you've given him in Colorado and Colorado State and all his friends, I and his brother are truly proud of him and all his accomplishments. His adult life was a complete contrast to our upbringing from Brooklyn. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment on Avenue J. I happen to see on the screen a John Dorney. I believe that's you. And heads up to you, John. Vince was always the husky boy who my mother had to take shopping in that section of the department store. I am the string bean. Boy, things changed over the years, though. We went in opposite directions. Growing up, we took occasional rides, sometimes out to Long Island. We always took a 2-week vacation in a cabin in the Adirondacks. And we did all those annoying card games, you know, we'd look for license plates and numbers and what have you. Until my father was ready to go through the roof and my mother would say, okay, it's time to stop that. And we made it out. It was like 7 or 8 hours every time we went and 7 or 8 hours coming back. So you can imagine the torment we provided for these parents. And as we got older, you know, Vince went off to school, and but he still came home, and we had the same pretty much circle of friends. We hung out in a lot of places, a lot of local bars we would go to. We lived a simple life. We'd meet up with some friends. One time in particular, we were out, I believe it was the Vanderveer Bar in Brooklyn. I think, John, you might remember that. And I left before he did, and I got home. And my mother greets me at the door. Meanwhile, this was like 2 or 3 in the morning. And he says, where's your brother? And I said, he left before I did, said he was going to get something to eat. She said, well, he's not home. So that meant, well, I had to go look for him. So I went down to this place we called the Junction. Is where these 2 avenues meet, Flatbush and Nostrand Avenue. And lo and behold, there was Vince sitting on a curb, watching the light go from red to green. And I went over to him. I said, Vince, what's going on? He says, this is amazing. He says, that light goes from red to green. And I said, yeah, when we go home, we can look at all the ones on the way home. And, you know, things like that. It was funny because he was let his hair down. I don't know if he was on his road to being an engineer or he just had too many pops, probably a little of both. But in any event, we got through that. And we went from there. When Vinny was younger, he had a penchant for hurting himself. But as this continued through his life, from his hips, his knees, and so on. But every time he got hurt, I ended up in the house. So he broke the same arm twice, once trying to jump over a porch railing, which didn't make it. And then he tried to stop himself roller skating and missed the door handle and he went down. But the best one I really loved was making snowballs to make a snowball fight. He bent over to make a snowball, cracked his head on one of those old car bumpers, and he got a bunch of stitches, and I again ended up in the house. And this went on and on and on. And then he went out, he moved out to Massachusetts. He went to UMass. And at one point, he gives me a call. And he was in the process of getting his doctorate. And he says, what are you doing next weekend? I says, well, I have no particular thing going on. But he informed me that he was getting married. And of course, I asked all the appropriate questions. And he asked if a buddy and myself could come up for the wedding. So I said, of course. And he asked me very much so not to tell my parents. And of course, I didn't. So off I went to Vince's wedding and Kathy's wedding. And then he proceeds to tell me a week later that he's coming home to introduce Kathy to my parents. And I said, well, I'll be sure I'm not going to be home for that one. And he came in and he told my father and my mother that he was married, introduced Kathy. And I was expecting, a little more than he got. But my father got up like a true gentleman, shook his hand and said, congratulations. And that's the kind of guy Vinny was. He was the ultimate of the right thing to say at the right time. Okay, he was a straight shooter. And you can't say much more about that, but as we continue on, we learn the value of respect for my father and my mother, and he lived his life showing of this respect. On the other hand, I took all the flack for him getting married because I didn't tell my mother. All right. So that, again, I was in the trouble again. But that's what brothers did for each other. However, opposite we got older, we went through our experiences in two different parts of the country. It gave us an insight to each other. Vince was always there when I needed him. He was kind and generous to myself, my 4 daughters. We all kind of joked about how frugal he was and how lightly he packed. And I remember he had these pants that he zipped off at the knees, and then they became shorts. So wherever he traveled, he took 1 pair of pants and they served them for, at night if it was cold and during the sun when it was hot. And it's one of those things. He was very basic and very down to earth. Education was very important to him, as all of you have stated, and all of you have given these great accolades to. I believe he took pride in hearing about my girls' academic achievements. All right, I didn't have those achievements, but I was the black sheep. I had a mass in my local parish said for Vince just yesterday, and the first reading was about how he was suffering, how people were suffering, and yet everyone's life has a purpose. Vince boasting about it, he was a generous soul. He was a generous brother. I have to thank each one of you for your kindness and your friendship that you gave him over the years. He was diminutive in his size, but he had the largest heart, and it's ironic that he died due to heart failure. His generous heart will be felt for decades to come. These last few years, we would often talk and end our calls with "Love you, brother." Last week, I got the call. Excuse me. He was saying goodbye. My heart broke, and all those years and all those memories I had came flooding back. Once Vince and I, one vice we had, we shared the racetrack. Whenever we got together, we would head out there. Christopher came with us a couple of times. I don't know if he was thrilled, but he came. And when Chris had told me Vince had passed, and I was kind of in a daze, I started scrolling through the day's entries at Aqueduct. And lo and behold, I come to the ninth race, and there's a horse there by the name of Vincent. So how could I not bet this horse? So I took $60, I placed it on Vinny, and well, he must be laughing his ass off because horse came in dead last. I said, you think you could have put in a good word for me up there, But I guess he didn't think that was the thing to do. But Vince, my message to you is very simple. May the road rise to meet you. May the wind always be at your back. May the sun shine warm on your face and the rains fall softly on your fields. Until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. And Vince was simply the best, and I will miss him dearly. And to that lady in the Bronx, Brooklyn was better.
Yeah. So several of the Murphys are all in one place. I'm one of Don's daughters, so I used to call him Uncle Vinny, but everybody calls him Vince, so I'm going to try really hard to make sure I keep calling him Uncle Vince. I feel like, when we talk about this preaching to the choir, when I think about Uncle Vince, he, like all of you there and everything you have all said, is a true testament to the positive impact he has had on the lives of so many. He was so kind and generous and thoughtful and so humble, but he had such a great sense of humor. He made sure to pass on his love of good books and authors that both he and Aunt Kathy shared to my boys and to myself. He always remembered their birthdays and would send them books, and he would even call to make sure. He's like, are they still reading books? Like what kind of books do they like? So always just so thoughtful, and he turned them on to authors and series that they never would have read without his sharing that love with them. His thoughtfulness and generosity didn't stop there, of course. You know, he started a college fund for my boys, so generous to make sure they had the opportunity to participate and access post-secondary education, which we are so thankful and grateful for. And while everyone has their own special memories of Uncle Vince, several of my fondest, one includes, I was about 13 years old. Uncle Vince was in New York. My dad was at work. We were going out to dinner and a movie. Can't go wrong with Chi-Chi's, you know, sizzling fajitas, chips and salsa. So that part was great. And then he chose the movie. I was 13 years old and we went to see Goodfellas. So as a 13-year-old girl, that was a different experience. You know, I remember hearing the swear words and some of the mobsters, you know, fighting and things. And I was like, ooh, I'm not sure I'm supposed to be here. And I believe he and my dad had some words after about the movie I got to see, but I remember he enjoyed it thoroughly and it was a great time. You know, in more recent years, we had the opportunity to visit the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown with Uncle Vince. And I smile now thinking about how he fully immersed himself in the museum, soaking up all of the history. I believe he read every plaque of everybody who was inducted. At the time, my boys were 9 and 11. So I was in that like median, like, please boys be quiet. Uncle Vince is enjoying this. We haven't seen him in a while. Let's all take this in. So he probably would have stayed until that museum closed. But we were able to coax him out with lunch and some craft beer. And so that was one of the gifts. In exchange for books, we sent him craft beer. So that was our birthday or holiday gift exchange. So the next time you guys anyone's having a beverage, I hope you raise a glass to Uncle Vince. He was really one of the good ones and he will be terribly, terribly missed. Thank you. Oh, there's more of us.
Yeah. Hi, sorry for how I look. I just got home from school, but my name is Maggie Murphy, and I just wanted to say thank you to Vince for always encouraging me and being supportive of me. Sorry. Growing up, I never really loved school or had a passion about school, and he shaped the way I look at college now. I would always call him at the end of the semester to tell him my grades because I knew he'd be shocked but proud, because he'd always encourage me to go to school, follow my dreams, and always try my best. And that's exactly what I'm doing, and I'm going to continue to do in his honor. And I know a lot of you had mentioned the birthdays, and I'd always get a funny card with a dog, but I also know I'd get a book I wouldn't read either. I'm not a big reader, but I know I'd get a book that he wanted me to read, so I'd try just for him. And I'd always also get a Colorado shirt because, as you guys mentioned, he loved the sports there. So I just wanted to say thank you for the impact he had on me, and he'll be missed dearly.
Just for your heart, Annie.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Annie.
You got 1 minute, all right?
We have another Murphy.
Sorry, hi, I'm the other one. I just wanted to echo what my younger sister said. I did like school and I do like to read, so that made me better than her when it came to Uncle Vince. So I enjoyed the books and I actually did read them, and he was always really supportive of my career, especially since I am in education and I am a teacher now, and I admire his passion for educating his college students, and I want that same passion for my younger second grade students that I teach, and he will be greatly missed.
Maybe this is a break that I should jump in at. My contacts with Vince have come really most often at pretty important times of life where he was a grade 8. I was hired as a faculty member at Iowa State, and when I showed up in winter quarter, Vince had been there since fall quarter on a 2-year appointment as a visiting instructor. And the age distribution in the department was such that, except for Vince, who had a few years on me, I was the youngest by 10 years. And so it was kind of a strange situation. And likewise for my wife. And so Kathy and Vince were invaluable. And we soon were seeing them and enjoying them all the time. Kathy's irreverence, one of the traditions there, they had some old traditions in the department. One was Chemie Wives Club. And so both my Bonnie and Vince's Kathy would entertain each other with their reluctance to become a Chemie wife. Vince, unfortunately, only had the 2-year appointment. And so our contacts became regular, but intermittent and at a distance. And that continued through the years with Vince showing up at important times of my life. He did come out and ride RAGBRAI with me. And I had done that a few times before that. And I found that when riding RAGBRAI with Vince, it was necessary to stop along the way and have a beer, something I never did until the end of the ride until then. I later went, again at an important time for me, after Bonnie died, Vince suggested I go with on a bike ride in Andalusia with his crew of cronies who made even more watering stops than we did on RAGBRAI. And Tony Allegrezzo got in with the group for the first time that time too. We were both on that ride together. And I remember Vince's dogged determination on a day when only the two of us chose to complete the route. And there was just no stopping him. And he did likewise show up at other important times in my life. And it amazed me in terms of his determination. I would stop by Fort Collins whenever I was in Colorado. And even as recently as October, with greatly declined health this last October, he still wanted to go out for lunch when I visited. And we had a wonderful time, and I was looking forward to being able to see him again the next time I was out there. And it was hard when I heard that he had died, and I thank Christopher for letting me know. So many thanks to Chris and to Vince, and Vince was so important in my life. Thank you.
This is Jim Bortz. I was a student. I hope everybody can hear me. I was a student in the chemical engineering department from 1987 to 1991. Dr. Murphy affected me before I even got to school. In the summer of 1987, me and a friend were bumming around the chemical engineering department, just trying to figure out what we were even going to do. And we happened to run across Dr. Murphy. And he looked at me and my friend and said, "Well, you guys in the chemical engineering department?" And I said, "Yes, we are." And we applied. He said, "Well, come with me." So we went to his office, and he had his job applications. And they were for within the department. And he said, "You need to fill these out and have these because you guys need to be working while you're in college." And so we filled those out, and I ended up working in the chemical engineering department my whole term. The first year working in the lab, and the last 3 years working in the computer lab in the chemical engineering department. So that was a profound moment, to get my start in the chemical engineering department. But most of all, what I remember, and Dr. Murphy truly put me on the path that I am now. I own my own firm. I'm a consultant chemical engineering. I worked various places. But on a Saturday morning, my junior year, Saturday morning, we usually didn't get up early. I got a phone call from Dr. Murphy at about 8 o'clock in the morning. It was bright and early for a college student, especially 21-year-old college student, that maybe had been drinking the night before. He said, you have a job interview for an internship with Dow Chemical in 3 hours. So get yourself together, get your suit on, and be over there to get this interview and be there. And he just hung up. There was no, you know, are you going to be there or anything else? I interviewed for that internship. I subsequently went to work as an intern for Dow Chemical in the allyl chloride epichlorohydrin plant. And I got hired on with Dow Chemical, all because of Dr. Murphy. And I worked for Dow Chemical for many years. And I still owe a debt of gratitude that I cannot even repay to Dr. Murphy. He was one of a kind. I feel for your family. I did hear from him a couple times after, but my condolences to everybody. He's probably one of the greatest impacts in my life, especially in my career, and he will sorely be missed.
Hello, John Dorney here.
You see my phone that thing?
Yeah, it's here.
Where? But we don't even hear her.
Well, you're not getting names, getting nothing going on.
Oh.
John, we can hear you and see you.
I can't see anybody. Am I on then?
Yes, we can hear you. Mhm.
Okay.
And see you.
I'm John Dorney. I have a little bit different perspective with Vinny. I can't call him Vince. We went to high school together, college together, and I'll iterate what Rich said, that what the Bronx is not Brooklyn. Brooklyn is better. And for all of you who drank a lot of beers with Vinny, I drank more. We, as I said, went to high school together, and then college, we were in the fraternity together. Good friends, played football together. And he was, in high school, he was the General Excellence Medal. He had the Engineering Award Medal from college. But you would never know it, as everybody has said. He kept himself, he was not filled with himself. He was a real Renaissance man. As I was an English major, so I know about him with his punctuation and everything else too. He was drilled into that too, but we had a lot of great times, and he was a good friend.
And this is Mary Beth Dorney, and Vince was in our bridal party. And what can I say? He had a beard. Somebody mentioned something about a beard, and people were like, but he was our Vince. Vinny, I'm sorry, it's hard to call him Vince, but I'll try.
Yeah.
Anyway, we love him dearly, and we treasured his friendship. And thank God we got to see him out in Colorado, what, 2 years ago?
Yeah.
So God bless you all and thank you for sharing.
But a good story too with the beard. Eventually, I ended up as vice principal at the high school that we went to together.
Zavarian.
And he came in, I'm trying to remember whether he was at UMass or whether he was already down in New Orleans at that time. But the receptionist at the high school was an Irish woman that had been there since we were students.
Old school.
Old school. And this was the 70s, and the kids would come in with long hair, and she had bobby pins to give them. So she was not a fan of this. And Vin came in with his beard and a braid down to his waist in the back off his motorcycle. And I got on the intercom, she called me and says, "There is someone here to see you." So I knew from the tone, and I said, "What's the name?" A Murphy. I said, "Oh, okay." So I came out and I got to call him Vinny. Vinny was standing there, and May O'Donnell was there with staring at him. I said, "May, I would like you to introduce Vinny Murphy, class of '61, won the Religion Medal and the General Excellence Medal." And she just sat back in the chair and said, "Yeah, what happened to him?"
God. He's a wonderful friend.
Yeah.
Well, God bless. What can I say? He
Yep.
will be missed, as everybody said.
And the best to all his family.
Yes.
I'm sure we could go on, couldn't we? I want to invite Dave McWhirter to come forward. Dave, thank you.
All of these stories warm my heart. And I had a whole list of things of the similar kinds that I can't tell those stories as well as they've already been told. But there are a couple of things that I wanted to be sure that you understood about Vince and I's friendship. And I thank you for inviting me to be here and give this little few remarks. And Vince valued brevity, sometimes I thought above all. And so I'm not going to take very long to give you my remarks. You know, it's a little surprising that Vince and I had such a close relationship, given the disparate backgrounds from which we came. He was raised on the concrete in Brooklyn, and I was raised in the rural areas of Colorado, and it would seem that we wouldn't have had much in common. But maybe to jump to the end of this, he was too wonderful a person not to immediately touch base with, and we became very close friends very soon after he came. And our friendship extended to Kathy as well. And what began as a professional collegial relationship soon became one of friendship. And it wasn't long after that that we actually regarded Vince and Kathy as part of our family. And we traveled together. We took road trips together. We took Experience Plus trips together. Not 27, but many. And he made a huge, huge impact on our lives, as he has obviously on many others here. Cutting this short, I just want a couple of things. I saw when we walked in, there was a picture of the old 1971 Pinto that was on the board here. And I remembered that it had a door that was the wrong color. But I wasn't sure I should mention that until I saw that picture, and sure enough, that was true. Well, those doors didn't always work on that thing. I don't know whether it was a chronic problem or just an occasional one, but one day, the dean of engineering caught Vince crawling out of the window of that car in the parking lot of the engineering building. He just looked at Vince and he says, "I guess I'm not paying you enough." You know, there's no single quality that defines Vince. You've heard a lot of them already, but his love for students and education in general comes very close to being a definition of what Vince was all about. No one could fail to recognize his deep and abiding interest and his heartfelt caring for the welfare of his students, least of all the students themselves. He was a beloved teacher. And Carol's description of how he graded exams and so forth was something I was going to go into too. I won't follow it because that was better than I could do. And but one thing that she didn't mention that I will say, you know, the university used to have and probably still does, a requirement that final semester grades be submitted within a short time period after the last final and final week. And whenever one of Vince's finals came up late in final week, he was set up for a conflict with the administration because he would refuse to not grade those papers in the manner that Carol indicated and give detailed feedback on every problem and spend hours and hours and hours, and he simply couldn't grade the final exam for his classes between Thursday afternoon and Monday afternoon when the grades were due. And he took a lot of flack from that year after year from the administration. But there was just another example of what he put first. He put his students first, and he never backed down from doing what he felt was the necessary thing that the students deserved, regardless of what the administration said. One thing I don't think has been said too much here this afternoon is that Vince's dedication to education didn't just stop with his professional responsibilities at the university. He was a generous giver to the university from a financial point of view. He set up many, many scholarships and professorships or fellowships, endowed them. I don't know what the total was, but it had to be a lot. And he did this mainly in the honor of people that he knew, students and other faculty member and friends. And so his legacy is going to continue for a long time from now. You know, Vince, has been said here many times, Vince was a serious sports fan. And Barbara and I had CSU football and basketball seats next to Vince and Kathy for over 40 years. And we traveled with them to nearly all the bowl games that CSU finally got to go to. And one of the characteristics about Vince was that you didn't dare leave a football game before the last whistle was blown. He would never forgive you for that. Just about the same way that he never forgave me for hitting a hard 17 at a blackjack table one time. And our families formed a league of our own of sorts, basketball league of our own of sorts. And they were 3 and we were 5, so we loaned them one of our sons. And we played basketball on one of the courts in the schools or parks nearby. And one day, Vince and Kathy Christopher showed up at the basketball game with these T-shirts. We emblazoned across the front of them, West, and they gave those to us because we were from the West. And the other one said, East Team Champions. Both Vince and Kathy were pretty competitive. And someone mentioned that you should never get them involved in Vince involved in a Jeopardy type game. And that was true of Kathy as well. They were a real team when they got going. We went on several road trips with Vince and Kathy, and we ended up in Brandon, Oregon one time without a hotel room, as was our usual case because we didn't plan. And we ended up sharing a room, all four of us. And but this place had a way to rent fishing poles and other fishing equipment that you could go down to the ocean, which was just across the fence, and fish. And I didn't know that Vince had ever even thought about fishing. He'd never mentioned it to me in all the years that I'd known him. And he said, Dave, let's give this a try. So we rented fishing poles and we went down to the pier and was going to fish off the pier. And one of the things that you could do is you could throw your line out and you caught these little fish that were about this big, and they were bait fish. And so part of the equipment that went with the rental materials that we obtained was a 5-gallon bucket with a lid on it and a hole about this big around, a bung hole we call them, and in the top. And these were to store your bait fish. And so we started fishing, and Vince got a bite, and he jerked his pole up out of the water, and this fish came up in the air, and it went right over here, and it came right down through the hole in that bucket. If I hadn't have seen it, I'd never believed it. And there was a couple of old gentlemen also fishing on the pier, and they got a big kick out of that as well. I don't think they'd ever seen that before in their lives. Another thing that may not have been mentioned so much here today is that Vince had a special compassion for the disadvantaged among us. And Vince believed in taking action on what he believed. And he generously supported various charities and political organizations that were oriented toward the cause of the poor. Income inequality in recent years was abhorrent to him. It really bothered him. And I guess I should have anticipated that would be the case, because there were many times when we were together with Vince and Kathy eating dinner or with the group or elsewhere that he insisted that everyone tip at a certain level. He believed that tipping was something that you had a responsibility to do because these people didn't make enough money. And he would even go so far as to call out people at the table if he thought that they didn't tip enough. I've seen him do that. And then if he didn't do that, well, he would slip money onto the table when no one was looking, so that he felt like the total tip was about what it should be. And this brings up the last point I'll make. I'll just shorten this, and that one of Vince's qualities that I especially admired was his consistency. And this was an example of that. His need to be fair to everyone that he met and knew. And his consistency was something like this. If he thought or believed something about issue A, then that thought or belief about issue A was completely consistent with what he thought about issue B. There wasn't ever a conflict between those two. And if you ever stop to think about it, that's very hard to do. And And even in these later years, that came to be true. I'll just give you one example. It wasn't so many years ago that it became known by society that concussions had the possibility of doing serious health damage to those that played football. And most of the professional football players are black and are disadvantaged. And he told me one day, he said, Dave, he said, I love football. He said, I've invested so much in football over my years. But he said, I'm going to give it up. He said, I can't support a sport which does that to these people. That's not quite what he said. I can't remember exact words. But that's the kind of person that Vince was. And I'll just end by just saying this, that it was high praise for Vince to refer to someone as a decent human being. To him, that encompassed being ethical, humorous, kind, compassionate, all of the things that Vince was. So one of those things that Vince was loyal to his friends. Someone has always said that. And he was loyal to Kathy. Barbara and I had gotten in the habit of going with Vince and Kathy to dinner at the Rio on her birthday every year. And we had done it for years and years. And after her death, Vince wanted to continue that. So for 16 years, we met for dinner on January 23rd to celebrate Kathy's birthday, even this January, when he was so sick and hard to get around. So my final word is that Vince was a decent human being, and we loved him, and we're going to miss him a lot.
Thank you, Dave. I know this might seem like unusual dress for a memorial service, especially for my own father's, but this was one of the shirts that Vince wore in a tight rotation in his last years, and it provides some clues about what made him who he was. The first thing you need to know about the shirt is that my mother, if she were still alive, would have burned it a long time ago. Not because it's from a bar called Shenanigans in Hollywood, Florida. I'm certain Vince acquired this on a trip with some of his cycling friends, and Kath loves cycling trips too. No, she would have chucked it because it's got gaping holes in the back and the collar is beginning to come off from the rest of the shirt. I know more than once my mother in her understated way would say, "Christopher, your father's a regular nut job." Now, one of my chief roles in our three-person household was to serve as a referee in what I think could be best described as my parents' deeply loving rivalry. So this kind of comment didn't faze me, and honestly, Kat said that kind of thing a lot. As I've grown older, I've gained more perspective, though, and I suspect that the trait of Vince's that really drove her around the bend was his tendency to keep things long past the time that other people would throw them out. He could not stand to waste anything. Now, I think most of us have some worn-out clothes and things that have been in the back of the fridge for too long, but if you know about the Pinto, and others have brought this up, then I think you might begin to see what Kath was getting at. For those of you who don't remember the 1970s so well, the Ford Pinto was a vehicle notorious for its tendency to explode on rear impact. It has been used as a case study in manufacturing ethics, and it shows up regularly on worst car of all time lists. Vince bought ours in about 1972, and we kept it until 1986. And this was despite the fact that several years before its demise, it was rammed in a CSU parking lot by a Domino's Pizza delivery Jeep that had been left unattended while the driver made a delivery. Police were unable to determine if the Pinto was a target of the Jeep's joyrider or just an unfortunate bystander, but the upshot of the collision was that the driver's side window was shattered and that door would no longer open. I think most people might have taken this as a moment to upgrade vehicles. I'm not exactly sure of the timing, but I think Vince by this time was either the acting or permanent department head of agricultural and chemical engineering, and I'm quite sure he could have afforded it, but that was not the route he chose. There was a period of several months, as Dave mentioned, where he would jump in and out of the empty window, Dukes of Hazzard style, But I think as we got closer to winter, he decided that would not continue to be practical, so he made a trip to a junkyard and found another Pinto door. Now, the Pinto was a two-door vehicle, so each door was unusually large and heavy. Replacing one is a two-person job, especially if you're going to do it in your garage. So Vince turned to one of his best friends, who at the time lived across the street, Bill Artzer, who is here today. I spoke with Bill recently about this seminal event, and he tells me that the task was so daunting that it required 3 beers each just to get started. The problem, you see, was that in addition to being a mismatched color, the door was kind of a dog turd brown while the rest of the car was banana yellow. The door was from a 1973 model and ours was a 1972, so it took for a few more beers worth of finagling to get it on there. Bill tells me the moment that he remembers most clearly from the experience was when Kath opened the door from the house to the garage, saw them working and said, "Oh, Jesus," and slammed the door. I don't remember that myself, but I am certain what was bothering her was the realization that the Frankenstein Pinto was going to haunt her garage. And in her defense, the door really did not work all that well. You had to lift up and then pull with all of your weight to get it to close, and even then it had a tendency to swing open when you were turning right, and centrifugal force pushed the door outward. Now, you might say you might just hold onto the door with your left hand when you're turning right, but this was a stick shift, so you needed one hand to downshift and the other hand on the wheel. Also, the car stalled whenever you took your foot off the gas, so you needed to turn the key halfway through just to make sure you made it through the intersection. So clearly, the logical solution was to remove the vinyl paneling from the inside of the door, hook a bungee cord into the metal frame, pull it across your lap, and then hook it to the other end of the base of the passenger seat. Problem solved. This worked for several years until one day the car gave out while I was driving it, and my friends had to help me push it home. I think Andy may have been one of them. It left a trail of Pinto blood down the length of Rocky Mountain Way. Vince happened to be out of town on business at the time, so Kath seized the opportunity to donate the Pinto to what is now Front Range Technical College. So that's the mindset we're talking about here. Don't give up on anything. And while that could be exasperating when it came to cars or clothes, it's also what kept Vince alive as long as he did. I don't know what the life expectancy would be for most people diagnosed with his condition, but I am certain that he lengthened his life by treating his body like an engineering problem. He kept handwritten charts of his daily weight and intake of sodium, protein, fiber, and fluid. The thing of it, though, was that every day was a struggle. Congestive heart failure is cruel. He spent hours every morning dealing with the side effects of the drugs he took to keep the swelling in his legs down and tending to the inevitable tears he got on his tender skin. Essentially, his free time began around noon each day, and he was exhausted by 5. So why didn't he give up? He knew he wasn't going to get better. He did take some joy in controlling those things that he could. Those of you who went grocery shopping with him, and some of you brought this up in his later years know what I'm talking about, he'd spend about an hour and a half buying $50 worth of groceries and usually achieved about that much in King Super savings. If you couldn't get a deal on it, it wasn't worth getting. But I think the real reason he didn't give up is because he couldn't give up on all of you. It was hard for him to figure out how to stay connected because he'd always been so active. He made so many close friends cycling, and he could no longer do that. He'd always been the guy who showed up at important events, often going across the country for old friends and family reunions, and he couldn't be that guy anymore either. So he did what he still could. He kept a lengthy list of birthdays and made sure never to miss one. And again, those of you who shopped with him, as Paul mentioned, know that he could take 20 minutes to pick out a single card. And he also wrote checks. He'd always been generous, certainly with his family, as his brother Donnie told you, and I can attest the same is true for me. But he's also been stunningly generous beyond his family, too. Several years ago, he created an endowment for a speaker series in Kath's name at the library district she used to lead. The next iteration of that series takes place tomorrow. And the weaker Vince got, the more checks he wrote. A month ago, I helped him do his taxes, and I was gobsmacked to see how much he donated to well over a dozen causes: higher education, social justice, the arts. And yet he dressed himself in rags. In the past month, when he knew he didn't have much time left, I only heard him take credit for 2 things. One was to say he did a pretty good thing for Kath in shepherding her care in the last months of her life, and the depth of that understatement is crushing. He also said, "I guess I kept good records." And if you've ever been in his office and seen the precise piles of paper statements from about every company he ever did business with over the past decade, you know that that is undeniably true. But that's the whole list of things he took credit for. So it's up to me to tell you that I don't know I've met someone who gave so much of himself and expected so little, even when every day hurt. I cannot tell you how proud I am to be his son. Thank you all so much for coming. Vince loved all of you.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you to all that are here and those that were online. And I apologize if some people wanted to speak and didn't have the opportunity to do that. I think we're going to close our time now with a piece of music. And let's use this time in our own way to be grateful and to say thank you and to remember Vince.
Oh, all the time that e'er I spent it in good company, and any harm that e'er I've done, I trust it was to none but me. May those I've loved through all the years have memories now they'll e'er recall. So fill me to the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Oh, all the comrades that e'er I had are sorry for my going away, and all the loved ones that e'er I had would wish me one more day to stay. But since it falls upon my lot that I should leave and you should not, I'll gently rise and I'll softly call. Good night and joy be with you all. Of all good times that e'er we shared, I leave to you fond memory. And for all the friendship that e'er we had, I ask you to remember me. And when you sit and stories tell, I'll be with you and help recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all.
Chris, I think you had extended an invitation to join the family at the Rio here in town. So they are looking forward to saying thank you. And also you'll have an opportunity to share more stories amongst yourselves. So Vince, may the hills always be green. May the skies always be blue. May there always be a beer waiting for you. Peace be with you.